What's up everybody, I'm Derek, this is Rocking eForge, and today I am going to show you how I forged this twist, or a twist similar to this piece, which I have not found a name for in particularly, so I'm going to call it the hollow half twist, and I really hope you enjoy it. Now, I came across this twist, amazingly, just scrolling through Pinterest one day. Now, I had an inkling in my head on how I thought it might have been forged and decided to test it out on this piece, this stake turner that I've made here about 5 to 6 months ago. And I think it turned out really unique and really nice looking, and it's kind of different than anything else I've seen. And it also led me to realize that I haven't seen any videos showing how to make this particular twist. So without any further ado, come along for the ride and let's get rocking. All right, so before I get to the twist, whatever I'm making here, I'm going to have a leaf at the end. So I'm just gonna quickly taper this leaf and then isolate that. So that I can move on to where the handle is going to be. All right, so now to get to the actual meat and potatoes of this twist here, I'm gonna come to the horn and use the rounding face of my rounding hammer and just start flattening out this piece of stock. All right, so the key here is to simply forge this flat about the length of the handle that you want to put on this, whatever piece you're making rather. And I take it to where it's about 1.5 times the original width of the piece. So it was about 3/8 round. It is now sitting at just about 9/16 of an inch wide. But the key here is to just kind of flatten it all out and then make sure everything is pretty well the same thickness all the way down, and then even up, and I'll do that on the next heat, but even up all of the kind of lumps that you develop here in order to move on to the next step. Now, you don't need a rounding hammer and you don't have to use the horn of your anvil. You can simply forge this flat on the flat face of the anvil, and using a flat hammer, flat-faced hammer if you have it. I simply just wanted to use the horn of the anvil to get more length out of this and use the rounding hammer to kind of match that radius there in order to get a little extra length. It also gave me the opportunity to just get a little nicer looking transitions here from the flat to the square cross sections of the piece. And all in all, isn't totally necessary. It's just kind of a lesson I learned from the first time I did this, in that starting out the flat face, you get some harder corners that you've either got to deal with or will look maybe not as perfect or not as nice in the final product. All right, and as I mentioned previous, I'm just going to come to the flat face and use the flat face of the hammer to even up all of those kind of lumps and bumps that I got from using the rounding hammer and the rounding face. And we're gonna just make sure that everything is kind of the same thickness, or as close to the same thickness as I can get it. Just make sure everything is even as possible. This will pay dividends on the final product, because the nicer this looks right now, the nicer it will look in the end product. All right, that's looking pretty good. So the next heat, I'm gonna move to the post vise. You don't have to use a vise if you're doing this as a beginner and you haven't amassed a big set of tools yet, but you do need some way to twist this, and a vise is generally the most convenient option. So we're gonna move to the post vise here shortly, and we'll see you on the next heat. The idea here is to simply just take this and twist 90 degrees. I want to move that down a little bit. 90 degrees from the original stock. So you get a 90-degree bend, and we'll come back and do this next by holding that same spot with this wrench and bending 90 degrees with a different wrench the opposite direction. You want this to alternate twisting back and forth in order to get the final product. You could still do a full twist, and that could come out with a really interesting twist as well. I haven't tried that, but it might be worth trying in the future. However, for this one in particular, you want to alternate that twist 90 degrees back and forth, and the way you want to make sure that this doesn't untwist here is to hold this with the wrench in the spot that you twisted it, and then reverse that twist the opposite direction. So I'm going to show you this just walking that up the piece, and I'm simply just going to do this one heat at a time so that I can get just a good 90-degree twist each time, and I don't have to worry about it untwisting or trying to twist it when I'm losing a lot of heat, etc. So take this slow, don't worry too much about getting this perfect either. It will come out in the long run. So what we've got here now is effectively the preform to the handle. This is the most complicated portion of the whole process. The next thing we're going to do is simply heat this up in the forge and then bring this back to the anvil and forge this down kind of on the edge of this ribbon, so to speak, in order to kind of turn this back into a bit of a square and then just start forging it round to walk our way around the ribbon, so to speak. And that'll become a little more clear on the actual heat, so we're going to get to that right now. Something else I forgot to mention, I did no measurements to where I placed these half twists. I simply just tried to eyeball it as close as I can. The more measured out you make this and like really follow maybe chalk marks or some sort of nicks in the piece of steel as like a center line for each of your twists, would make this a lot more uniform and probably turn this out a bit nicer. I personally found that just eyeballing it does good enough, and we're gonna move forward with that. All right, so the biggest thing to note here is to simply, as you're forging this back kind of into the body of the twist, you've gotta make sure that when you are, whatever you're striking is nearly perpendicularly supported by the face of the anvil to avoid bending that further or otherwise missshaping the actual twist here. And this kind of works just kind of the same way as going from square to octagon to round. You're simply just kind of forging those facets that develop after each strike back into the piece, simply just along the ribbon edge as opposed to a regular full square cross-section piece. And feel free to take as long as you want here. The precision and making sure everything is flat on the face of the anvil and your hammer strike is directly into the face is more important in getting the shape correct than going fast. All right, so that effectively brings us down to just inside the original diameter of the 3/8 piece of round bar. I'm at just about a 1/4 inch all the way at each individual location along the length of this. And that is unfortunately the downside to using this technique, is if you want these kind of channels or grooves in the hollow twist to be pretty tight and not, wide open like this spot, you have to get the twist thinner than the original stock thickness, because as you're hammering this back into the center, you're spreading the ribbon out and continuing to kind of bend it and fold it over to an extent so that you actually get this kind of channel look in the middle as opposed to kind of just a weird wide open location. Now obviously there are locations where it's much skinnier, and then there's locations where it's a lot wider, and that can be explained primarily by the kind of variations in measurements between each successive twist or half twist, but it can also come from simply just the variations in how hard you strike or where you strike along each location, how sharply or how sweepingly you actually twisted or half twisted the flat stock, any variations in thickness or width of the kind of flattened portion of the stock that you started this twisting process with, and so on. So I kind of like the almost random variation there is to it. I think it kind of adds a nice degree of character, for lack of a better word, to the piece. I really like the way it turns out as kind of a unique decorative element to a handle for something that's a little different from the regular twists that you see out there. Alright, so that is going to kind of do it for the tutorial on how I forged this particular twist, which I am calling the hollow half twist. And I hope that you learned a new technique for putting decorative elements on certain pieces that you are working on, and enjoyed this video in the process. If you did, please drop a like, leave a comment, hit subscribe, or ring that notification bell. If you want to support me and the channel further, please consider becoming an honorary striker on my Patreon. That link is in the description below the video. Or please consider becoming a member on my YouTube channel. And as always, keep on rocking.